All right, let's dive into a force that's all around us, one you feel every single day, but maybe don't think too much about. Pressure. Yeah, it's in your car tires. It's what the weather person is talking about. It's even in the fizz of the drink you might be sipping on. We're going to break it all down and show you why getting a handle on this is actually a pretty big deal.
Okay, so picture this. You're at the gas station, you're filling up your tires, and the gauge reads, say, 35 psi. You've probably done it 100 times. But have you ever actually stopped and thought, what does that number really mean? Like, what's it being measured against? The answer, I promise you, is going to change the way you think about pressure forever.
So before we can solve that tire pressure mystery, we've got to go back to square one. What even is pressure? It's this fundamental force, that's always in play, whether we're paying attention to it or not. Here's a super simple way to think about it. You could push on a wall with your thumb as hard as you can, and, well, nothing's going to happen, right? But take that exact same force and put it on the tiny point of a thumbtack, it slides right in. That's pressure in a nutshell. It's all about how concentrated that force is. Now, this is where it gets really, really cool. Imagine squeezing a water balloon. The pressure you're putting on it with your fingers, it doesn't just stay there, right? The whole balloon bulges out everywhere at once. That's Pascal's law. And that exact same principle is how a mechanic can lift a 2-ton car just by pushing on a little pedal. It's an incredible force multiplier. But here's the thing. You don't need a fancy hydraulic lift to experience pressure. We're actually swimming in it, right now. We live at the bottom of a giant ocean of air, and it's pushing down on us from every single direction. And this diagram shows it perfectly. See, the deeper you go, the more fluid, the more stuff is sitting on top of you pushing down. It's the exact reason your ears feel like they're going to pop when you dive to the bottom of a deep swimming pool. That's the sheer weight of all that water pressing in on you. And that brings us to atmospheric pressure. That huge ocean of air I mentioned, it is surprisingly heavy. Down here at sea level, it's pushing on you with about 14.7 pounds on every single square inch. That is like balancing a bowling ball on every square inch of your body. So why don't we get flattened like a pancake? Well, because the pressure inside our bodies is pushing out with the exact same force. We're in perfect balance. So if we're living under this constant blanket of 14.7 psi all the time, how do we measure any other pressure? How do we make sense of it all? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. It turns out we need a few different ways to look at pressure, and it all comes down to choosing your starting point, your zero. Okay, let's unpack this chart because it's got everything we need. Stick with me here. Way, way down at the bottom, you have absolute zero pressure. That's a perfect vacuum, nothing. The total absence of pressure. That's our true zero. Now move up to that line for local atmospheric pressure. That's our everyday 14.7 psi. For most things we do, we just pretend this is zero. We call it gauge zero. So any pressure we measure above this line is called gauge pressure, and anything below it, that's vacuum pressure. And here's how it all fits together in a couple of simple formulas. The absolute pressure, that's the total true pressure, is just the gauge pressure you measure, plus that atmospheric pressure that's always there. It's the whole shebang. And if you're measuring a vacuum, you're just looking at how much pressure you've taken away from the atmospheric pressure. Simple as that. And, drum roll please, we're back to our tire. That 35 psi on your gauge, that is gauge pressure. It's not the total pressure inside the tire. It's telling you that there's 35 psi more pressure inside that tire than there is in the air outside of it. So the absolute total pressure is actually that 35 psi plus the 14.7 psi of the atmosphere. You're looking at nearly 50 psi in total. Kind of blows your mind, right? Okay, so we've got the theory down. That's great. But how do we actually see this invisible force? How do we measure it? Well, let's take a quick look at some of the really clever ways engineers have figured out how to do just that. First up, we have the piezometer. This is about as basic as it gets. It's just a tube. The pressure inside the pipe pushes the liquid up the tube. The higher the liquid goes, the higher the pressure. It's simple, it's elegant, and it works great for liquids. But it's not so useful for gases. Now, the U-tube manometer. This is a serious upgrade. By using a really dense liquid, like mercury, we can measure much, much higher pressures without needing a tube that's as tall as a building. The pressure just pushes down on one side of the U, and you measure the height difference. It's a classic design for a very good reason. But let's be real. You're not going to find a glass U-tube full of mercury on your dashboard or on your bike pump. For most of the stuff we use every day, we need something a lot more compact and a whole lot more clever. Meet the Bourdon tube gauge, and honestly, this thing is a mechanical work of art. The pressure goes into this little curved, C-shaped tube, and it tries to straighten the tube out. Then, a whole system of tiny, precise gears takes that microscopic movement and magnifies it, turning it into the big, sweeping motion of the needle on the dial. It's like a finely crafted watch, but for pressure, it is so cool.
And now that you know what to look for, I guarantee you're going to start seeing these things absolutely everywhere. They are the silent workhorses of our modern world, doing everything from keeping hospital oxygen tanks safe to making sure our power plants are running just right. They're a true unsung hero of engineering.
So the next time you see a pressure gauge, you'll know the whole story. You'll know it's not just a number. It's a relationship. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other numbers that we treat as absolute in our daily lives are really just a matter of perspective? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this one.